resources that we're going to release imminently, meaning days. In fact, I've been discussing with Internet Shakespeare Editions the terms of the license. Otherwise, I'll be giving it to you right now. But I would imagine next week or very shortly, these resources that we're going to be talking about, say these resources relating to the enhanced Shakespearean Corpus. These are the ones we're going to be releasing. So we're going to give you a quick rundown of what these are. We're not going to illustrate these at this point in time with case studies. Those are in the bits after the break, when we sort of give you a sense of results and that sort of thing. So, you'll note the term enhanced Shakespearean Corpus. And it's the enhanced that is our contribution. Sure, you can get the texts from elsewhere, but we've done the enhanced bit, and that's what we really want to talk about and give you a sense of what that involves. So, there are three components to this. There's the first bit, which we've labelled First Folio Plus, and that is signalling the fact that it's largely based, the text from the first folio is 1623. The plus bit is because to accommodate the canon, we have included Pericles and the two noble kinsmen as well. I will be talking about this component next. We have also put together a comparative corpus of plays, so you can compare Shakespeare against contemporary playwrights, and Jane's going to be talking about that in a moment. And finally, Sean is going to be coming up talking about early English books online, EEBO-TCP stands for Text Creation Partnership. They produce a fully searchable version of these files, and he's going to be talking about the segment that we have curated, developed and enhanced. Okay, so this is me on the Shakespeare component. If first folio sounds a bit alien to you, just think Shakespeare. This is what we're talking about. Okay, the base texts. I've already mentioned it, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is what it consists of. We actually also include, when I go around and do talks on this, if I'm talking to some Shakespeareans, they get very vexed about the fact that it's only the folio. So I usually point out to them, actually, we have we're dealing with the quartos, we're not on the same level of detail. So we have the quartos there, 22 quarto plays, along with the poetry. We've got that as well. The source of all texts is Internet Shakespeare Editions. If you just Google that, you'll go to it. It's a marvellous website. They have all sorts of editions and versions. But from my point of view, the lovely thing is they had an original spelling version of all those texts, and that's what we wanted. They're the only competing one I know of. There is another set in the Oxford Text Archive, and actually there's another one that the Bodleian had been doing. And so at the beginning of this project, I was trying to get a sense of which was the most accurate. There is no, in terms of transcribing it, because you have the text in the original, but then you've got to digitize it, you've got to type it up or something. So which is the one that's likely to be less error-ridden? There's no such thing as a perfect transcription. So they'll always have some mistakes in, but how carefully did they do it and all the rest of it? And the sense I got was that the Internet Shakespeare Editions one was particularly good, and they are very generous with distributing it, etc., etc. And you can go to their website if you want to see a fully modernized one done by an editor. You can do that too, etc., etc. So that's what we went with. The enhancements. Well, I'm going to be talking about the way in which we've added various layers of annotation or tagging. In corpus speak, corpus annotation is the practice of adding interpretive linguistic information to an electronic corpus of spoken and or written language data. So I mean, typically people are thinking of, in terms of tagging, I think of adding on parts of speech. To each word will have a little tag indicating whether it's a noun or a verb or whatever, and then you can separate out the instances of love as a verb from love as a noun and all this kind of thing, and do the counts and all the rest of it. And if you're doing a dictionary, this is essential, because you'd have maybe one entry for love as a verb and another entry as love as a noun, all this sort of thing. In addition, we've actually gone further with the notion of tagging, really with this more annotation. And I often think of this as it's a bit like doing qualitative analysis, but in a very systematic way, and we've added on social annotation. I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the kinds of things we've been doing, you'll note there's a number 1 there behind in front of spelling, regularization. This is one of the first things we did. Obviously we have the original spelling, we need to regularize it. How do we do that? Well, let me just say one thing. This is the extent of the problem. This is a great study. Alistair Barron et al. Alistair Barron is there. I can't remember who all the et als are, but more of them are in the room. Several of them are in the room. And they got a sense of how much spelling variation was in the first folio. And you'll see, I can't remember what there's a little there. It's there. That's the first folio there. This represents all these texts, the number of spelling variants in these texts. So you can see English spelling is becoming sort of regularized down here, but Shakespeare is about halfway through. There's a load of spelling variation. And as you see in this note, that the first folio in orange there is above, it is quite high up in terms of spelling variants. You've got a lot of stuff to cope with. If you search for a term like sweet without an E on the end, you'll get the sweet, some sweets, but you won't necessarily get all of them. And that's the point. So you have to regularize this stuff so you can actually search on it. How do we do that? And this is Alistair Barron's contribution really to the project. We use the tool VARD2, variant detector. You'll note a pun on VARD and BARD. That was intentional, I think. Hope. Oh, Paul, was it? I'll blame you for that. Was it? Are you? Oh, did you do that? Right. Fantastic. Okay.
Thank you for appreciating that.
So that was left in as one of. Anyway, obviously it's then very appropriate that we're using it on this project. The thing about this tool is it's easy to use, and that's why I put a little screenshot here. Here is a bit from Henry V. You can almost see it in grey at the top. You drop it into the tool pretty much, and then in yellow it's saying I don't recognise the spelling of this word because it's not in the regular, the standard. Not quite. You can't really talk about standard in that period, but the regular lexicon. So it's saying, do you want to fix these spellings? You've got 2 ways of doing that. You can do the automize thing here, click a button. I won't go into that. That's one way of doing it. Or you can do what we did on the project. We went through, and if you put your cursor over the yellow, it gives you some possible options. And then you can quickly regularize it to the one you want it to be. It really speeds up that manual process. I say speeds up, it still took, I was trying to work out, but it took Jane and Sean, I think about, one of you would be about 8 months, something like that.
3 to 4 months.
Yeah. So a lot of time to do it, but nevertheless we did that. And whilst it enables you to do other things as well, we were able to mark up, if we saw a word that was French or Latin or Italian, it enables you to mark it up. And it does not delete the word from your text. It puts the original spelling in XML brackets and just leaves the regular form there for you. So if you want to switch it back and regain the original spelling, you can do. It is not deleting it, and that's absolutely crucial. It's adding in information, not taking it away. Okay, so that was the first process. Then the grammatical tagging to facilitate dictionaries, grammars, study of dialect styles, other things, and also to make other processes more accurate. How do we do? Well, part of speech tagging. Here's an example: to be or not to be. And you can see you've got these little tags, underscores. So on B, you've got underscore V, indicating it's a verb of some kind, and then the other letter's the kind of verb that it is. And so each word is given a grammatical tag. We can do it through clause, and this is one of Andrew's big contributions. He has added some fixes, patches, and all sorts of other things to clause to get it to work better with early modern English. That was the first thing he did. I think this is my other thing. The other thing he did, and this makes me break out in the sweat when I think of it, he went through and checked every single word in Shakespeare, that's almost 1 million words, and checked that the tag was right, at least as far as the major part of it, the first letter, which is a monumental task. Thank you, Andrew. I think that is the first fully parsed and part-of-speech tagged Shakespearean corpus in the world that's done quite accurately. Moving on. Social annotation, I already briefly mentioned that. We wanted to go further than just the grammar and put in something about who was speaking to whom. This is an entirely manual affair. There's nothing that will do it for you, alas. And this is something Dawn and I have been pioneering over the years. And this is just to give you a quick example of how it's done. You have these XML sort of tags, and we put in extra information. You see it says sex equals M, male, status, on a scale of status. 1 is quite high up. Nobility is 0, 1 is nobility. So, sorry, royalty is 0, 1 is nobility, etc. So we went through and we coded off what speakers were actually in terms of status and all the rest of it. Again, quite an involved task. These are some of the values that we added into the data. You can see them here. So how many speakers are involved is an issue. But one of the interesting things we did was to devise this social status rank thing, which proved it allows us to get a sense of is the language coloured by the rank of the actual speaker, etc., etc. We can pursue some sociolinguistic questions here. I won't go on with that for reasons of time, but pass over to Jane.
So why would we want to go to the trouble of compiling a second corpus of early modern English drama and regularising the spelling and tagging it and annotating it in the ways that Jonathan's just described for the first Folio Plus corpus? Well, there are two main reasons for this. Firstly, having a second body of early modern English play text data that's very relevant and close to Shakespeare's in time period means that we can identify language style features which are or are not typical of plays more widely in the same period and not just related to Shakespeare. So it provides a linguistic backdrop against which we can compare Shakespeare's language. Secondly, and relatedly, historical drama has been described by Jonathan Culpeper and Maria Coto, amongst others, as a speech-like genre. And it's been successfully studied for insights into pragmatics and other sociolinguistic phenomena of the period, even though it's obviously not like spoken data in some respects. It's scripted and so on. So again, having this second body of data sort of doubles the amount of data that we can use to investigate sociolinguistic factors. So in terms of how we began to compile it, the first Folio Plus data set is 38 plays with first production dates from 1589 to 1613, and so we started as date as the point of comparison. The comparative plays corpus is 46 plays by 24 other playwrights, so the plays are slightly shorter on average than Shakespeare's plays. The first production dates are from the mid-1580s to the mid-1620s, which is just over 40 years, so approximately one generation of language as that's been conceived of by other historical corpus compilers, for example, the compilers of the Helsinki corpus. And the reason for that is within about 40 years, it's argued that style features and style variation in language is less likely to be due to simply a change in language over time. So keeping it within that time period, hopefully we minimise that as a factor behind any variation we might find. And both corpora are just over 1 million words in size, and I'll show you the detail of that in a moment. I just briefly mentioned the inclusion criteria for the comparative plays corpus. As I say, we started with date, restricting the plays, or the search for the plays, to the 1580s to the 1620s. We also wanted some that were produced early on in that period and some that were produced relatively late, again sort of mirroring the situation with Shakespeare's plays, so there was a comparable distribution. And we wanted similar proportions of each dramatic genre, comedy, history and tragedy, so that if we find language variation, it isn't likely to be there because there is so much comedy that it's sort of skewed to features that might be typical of banter. Or similarly, if there is too much history, you get a lot of talk amongst high status characters, monarchs and nobles and so on. Now, once you restrict your search to a date period and early and late within that, and particular quotas for each genre, it's surprising how that narrows down the choice of plays to include of the ones that are available, and they're all sourced from the EEBO-TCP. We also considered some other factors to make our choices as relevant to comparisons with Shakespeare as possible. So popularity of plays. Shakespeare's plays were largely popular and successful. It's difficult really to determine this in some respects, but we've included some plays that we know were very popular and successful, like Thomas Kyd's Spanish Tragedy, Johnson's Dr. Faustus, Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and Johnson's Bartholomew Fair. We've also got some less well-known authors in there, for example Thomas Drew, who wrote the play The Duchess of Sussex, and the anonymous play Musidorus. We limited the comparative corpus plays to male authors because Shakespeare is a male author, and we didn't want to include author gender as a variable, although that would be interesting. Women in this period didn't write for public theatre, whereas men did, so we would have to assume that that might be a factor that was relevant to language choice, so we excluded that for the purposes of this project. We did include some collaborative plays. Shakespeare's plays, some of them are known to be collaborative, so we saw no reason to exclude those from the comparative corpus. We did try to minimise the number of anonymous plays, just in case it should in future times be that authorship maybe suggested that Shakespeare was an author. The two that we have included are not, so far as we know, associated possibly with Shakespeare. And we also chose plays that have a mixture of verse and prose, like Shakespeare's do, although it would have been impossible to completely match the amounts of verse and prose in a comparative corpus. So this is just a brief look at the content and how successful we were in our efforts to create a comparative corpus. As you can see from the bottom row, both corpora are just over 1 million words. The comedy section of the comparative corpus is slightly larger relative to that in the Shakespeare First Folio corpus, and the tragedy section of the comparative corpus is a little bit smaller. That was because we had trouble sourcing comparative comedy plays in the tragedy genre. So we compensated for that by including a few more comedies, which we felt was preferable to extending the date range beyond the period of one language generation. So that is the comparative corpus in a nutshell. I'll hand you over now to Sean to talk about the EEBO section.
Okay, so the third component of the enhanced Shakespearean corpus is the EEBO-TCP segment, Early English Books Online Text Creation Partnership, as Jonathan said. And this is an immense repository of texts against which we can compare Shakespeare. So a very valuable resource. Okay, so what's the value of this? Well, if we observe big data through a corpus linguistic lens, then we are effectively doing macro reading of thousands of texts, millions of words. And by doing this, we can tap into the meanings that were triggered in the minds of Elizabethan, Jacobean audiences, and begin to understand what resonance Shakespeare's words must have had for his audiences at the time. We can also look at the distribution of words across genres, and therefore we get a sense of the stylistic flavour of words. Were they religious in tone? Were they colloquial? Were they formal, didactic, whatever? Okay, so let's have a look at the what this segment consists of. It's about 5,700 texts. It's 300 million words, so it's about a quarter of the EEBO, total amount of EEBO, which is about 1.2 billion words. And It doesn't include certain things. It doesn't include Shakespeare texts. It doesn't include texts which are in James' contemporary corpus. And it doesn't include texts which are in languages other than English. Okay. Jane talked about generations. The EEBO segment conveniently covers 2 generations, again as defined as 40 years. A generation is 40 years, both before the turn of the century and after the turn of the century, which is significant in itself because, of course, there's a change of monarch. And also some people would argue that there was a development in Shakespeare's career critically around about 1600. Okay. And this is the genre classification system that we came up with. Now, I should point out here that original work on this was done by Tony McHenry, and he essentially he classified the texts in EEBO on the basis of first titles or second titles or even third titles using a computer-based method. Okay, and he also looked at library catalogues and how texts were classified. What he was particularly concerned about doing was not imposing modern interpretations of genre on early modern texts. Okay, so thanks to Tony for doing all this preliminary work. What I did is I organized the texts in the segment into 5 broad domains, shown here: literary, religious, administrative, instructional, informational, and then slotted in Tony's genres into these domains, and mapped a style category on to each of the domains as well. The great thing about this system on CQP Web is that you can look at any one of these areas, the genre or the domain or the style label, or even Tony's original categorization of texts, and investigate any particular genre or combination of genres in any way you like. Okay.
We're now going to do a